What is it about graveyards and cemeteries that we find eerie and disturbing? Is it the morbid reminder of our inevitable demise, our frail egos shattered by the thought of our mortality, or do we falsely allocate these places as dark and mysterious locations out of fear from an insufficient understanding of death? Why are the disturbed and menacing drawn to these environments? Is there something infecting the area with a sense of dread and malice, even leading to higher crime rates? Could these expansive masses of land, filled with the corpses of the loved and despised, actually be tuning rods to the other side, giving those eternally resting there an opportunity to engage with the living? Will you respond to the invitation? For this story, we revisit Paul in Santa Ana, California, from our Who's There Series 1 story. For those yet to listen to it, Paul was a construction worker laid off during the pandemic. He had moved in with his father to a private senior citizen community called Lake Park. It is located close to the Santa Ana, Tustin, and Orange City borders, and ironically next door to the Fairhaven Memorial Park and Santa Ana Cemetery. The residents of Lake Park vary in friendliness, but not many problems arise between them. The most aggravation comes from the main road, Fairhaven Avenue, where cars speed recklessly all hours of the day, and dangerously troubled individuals loiter. At night, the street becomes a racetrack for the adrenaline-hungry youths of the area. This was a great annoyance for Paul, as he spent most of his nights outside on video chats and streaming content. He preferred the cool, crisp air of the outside and enjoyed being able to smoke without having to stop what he was doing. At random times, the piercing sound of rubber screeching across the blacktop would painfully echo into Paul's ears. He was separated from the main street by a row of homes, a private road, a single-row guest parking lot, and a 3-foot-thick hedge. But where he sat, every noise was amplified and repeated as it bounced off the walls surrounding him. The later the night, the less pandemonium could be heard from Fairhaven Avenue. Paul, being somewhat of an insomniac, would be in his spot outside sometimes until the very early hours of the next day. He found between 2 and 4 a.m. to be the most peaceful, with the only audible sound a slight humming wind coming from the freeway in the near distance. On a clear, quiet night around 3:30 a.m., in the middle of January, Paul sat binge-watching a show on his laptop. He'd found himself unable to stop watching while the hours passed as he was enthralled with every detail of the show. There hadn't been much commotion that night, so it was almost completely silent. Even the hum from the freeway was unnaturally faint. But Paul was too engrossed in his show to notice the lack of noise. At a pivotal moment in the show, the outside silence was shattered by 2 sharp tones. Irritated by the distraction, Paul paused his show and removed his headphones. He impatiently waited for the tones to repeat so he could identify the disturbance. After a few moments of nothing but stillness, Paul picked up his headphones, only to be startled by a shrill, strident whistle. It continued on every 4 to 5 seconds, shocking Paul each time with its intense volume. He had heard this before a few nights in a row, but was in awe of how sharp and loud it was. Paul thought it could be a drunk or a drug addict aimlessly wandering the street, unaware or not caring they were being so raucous. Provoked by the nuisance, he let out as loud of a mimicking whistle he could muster. The unknown source of the sound suddenly stopped mid-whistle. Paul listened intently but could hear nothing in response. He waited in silence, even holding his breath to see if he could hear footsteps. When the whistle came bellowing through the hedge only 20 feet from him. He let out a faint gasp, then froze, clenching his whole body. It was as if someone was sticking their head into the thick hedge and expelling a screaming whistle. Paul was horrified at what could happen next. The entrance to the private yard was just a few wide steps away from where the now spine-chilling sound was originating. The possibilities of who or what it was raced through his mind, and how if it was a crazed person, they could easily get to him. Paul did his best to prepare himself for an unpredictable attack, with a possible threat causing adrenaline to course through his body. His heart began to pound in his chest, and all his senses focused on the source of the whistle, but still he could decipher nothing from it. Even with the boost of adrenaline, he was cautious to make his presence known. He was sure if it was a frenzied addict, that they would have no quarrels viciously attacking him for no reason. After one final wailing whistle, the unidentified source seemed to vanish, leaving behind only the soft hum of the cars on the freeway. Paul was still in shock of what had just transpired, but eventually gathered himself enough to pack his things and move inside as quietly and quickly as he could. Once inside, he pondered on who it possibly could have been, and wondered if it could somehow be connected to the unexplained banging on his window in the middle of the night, months before. After coming to no conclusion, he decided to go to sleep. The next day went on as normal, and so Paul kept his strange experience to himself. He didn't want people in the community to think he was making things up. After the late-night knocks on his window, he had asked neighbors to view their security camera footage, and when nothing came of it, he could tell they looked at him differently. Paul pushed the experience from his mind and moved on. A few days later, he was walking out to get the mail when he struck up a conversation with a neighbor whose house backed up to Fairhaven Avenue. The neighbor was in his 70s, a bit rough, but was very friendly. It started as a normal conversation for Paul, with a routine exchange of the same utterances until the neighbor said, "Have you heard that crazy damn whistling every night?" Paul felt a shiver trickle down his spine. As the experience from before came flooding back, he admitted to the man he had heard it, but did not divulge any details. The elderly man went on to tell Paul his experience. The man likes to sit in his backyard at night and look at the stars. Since his wife passed, he's had a hard time sleeping. Because his yard backs up to the main street, he could hear all the nonsense going on, as he put it. His family even installed cameras along the back wall so he could see what was happening behind his home. A few nights before, he was enjoying the clear skies and relaxing when he heard the piercing whistle echo from the dark. He brushed it off as what he called a degenerate wandering the streets. The man listened patiently as the whistler traveled from the front of the memorial park to the very back of his yard and stopped moving. The sound continued 2 more times, then completely ceased. The man was confused, but being a war veteran, this didn't scare him. The whistler would return each night around the same time, doing the same thing. On the 5th night, when the sound returned, the man decided he'd had enough and yelled, "Cut it out!" The whistler stopped for a moment. The man felt accomplished in putting an end to the mischief. Just as he was enjoying his victory, a penetrating whistle came squealing from the other side of the wall. The man was furious at this and wasn't going to be intimidated by anyone. He walked over to the wall, and again the unknown lurker let out its melodic screech. Even more enraged by what he perceived as mockery, the senior painfully stood up on a planar wall and looked over to find no one there. He turned left and right, scanning the expanse of the street and the sidewalk, but still could find no trace of anyone. He realized then he couldn't hear the sound anymore either. Frustrated and a little unnerved, he decided he would call his son the next day to help him check the security footage from the system he hadn't figured out yet. The son arrived and was in disbelief of what his father had relayed to him, until they viewed the footage and were left dumbfounded. There was no movement or sign of anyone whatsoever on the video, but you could clearly hear the chill-inducing whistle as something unable to be seen crept closer and closer to the elderly man's yard until it crescendoed, seemingly right next to one of the cameras. The father and son stared at each other, perplexed by the lack of visual evidence. Neither of them were superstitious people, but this had them questioning their beliefs. Paul was shocked and alarmed by his neighbor's account of events, and got even more unsettled when the man said, "I've lived here 20 years, and for the first time, I'm kind of scared of that cemetery." Paul hadn't even thought about the cemetery being connected. His heart sank into his stomach, but he showed no sign of agitation. He gave the man a fake laugh and finished the conversation. He walked back home as his mind swirled with the bewildering details he was just told. The memorial park had never been a place of darkness to him. He viewed it as a peaceful sanctuary. As a young child, his mother would walk with him through the park and marvel at its historic structures, making sure he learned to appreciate the art and craftsmanship that went into honoring those resting there. As a teenager, he and his friends would hop the fence into the graveyard and hang out, drinking and smoking while trying not to disrespect the departed. As an adult, it was a place to walk during the day and clear his head. There was a specific tree he liked to stand under at the far end of the property, where he felt the most at peace. Growing up, he hung out there during the day and at night, and now walked there at least once a week, but had never encountered any malevolent spirits, or people for that matter, until now. What was stalking the street in front of the Lake Park community, calling out with a baleful whistle? Could it have been a delirious derelict out to scare or even harm strangers? If it was a person, how are they able to remain unseen even from current-day security camera technology? How is it possible they were able to move from the street to inside the gated community with such silent speed? And how could they whistle so perfectly and loud after achieving such feats? What kind of power lies within a whistle? Most cultures have warnings against whistling at night, for you could conjure anything from bad luck, disastrous weather, dark spirits, to the devil himself. It's feasible by responding to the call in the dark. Paul and the elderly neighbor inadvertently invited something they couldn't possibly understand to audibly assault them. Is there a connection to the memorial park and attached cemeteries? Could there be some kind of dark link to the other side, protruding through the veil that separates our realms? Are we missing the clues left for us to find in the sordid and forgotten past of the Santa Ana graveyard? The Fairhaven Memorial Park and Santa Ana Cemetery carries a plethora of macabre history and present-day tragedies. In this investigation, we aim to find the relation between the burial grounds, its disregarded history, as well as the bizarre and violent activity of the immediate area and neighboring community. Santa Ana was founded in 1869, and with the large number of people settling at the newly bustling location, there was a need for a proper place to bury those who had passed. In 1870, the Santa Ana Cemetery was constructed by Jacob Ross, but over the years began to fill to capacity. And the fact it was in the middle of downtown meant no room for expansion. The cemetery was then moved, in 1898, to a 100-acre lot, what is now Fairhaven Avenue and Santa Clara Avenue. This would allow for the rising number of dead due to the harsh conditions at the time. The land began to fill with tall, ornate gravestones for the many settlers and veterans. Others would follow suit, with small portions of the land being purchased by the St. John's Lutheran Church and the Freemasons, erecting more mightily stout headstones. Seeing an opportunity for something different, Oliver Lindell Halsell procured 2/3 of the property in 1911. He wanted a new style of gravestone that sat flat with the ground, giving a visitor the illusion of a vast open field. The Fairhaven Memorial Park became the dominating presence. In 1916, an extravagant mausoleum was built at the center of the 73-acre memorial park. The structure is a 2-story, high-vaulted ceiling tomb decorated with detailed artistry. The windows are all beautifully colored stained glass scenes of religious significance, and the acoustics of the building have an otherworldly reverberation. Charlton Heston is said to have recorded his part as Moses in the Ten Commandments inside its halls because of its godly echo. With a crematorium being added in 1931, a mortuary in 1976, and many other outdoor mausoleums more recently, the vast variety of occupants continued to increase. The grounds are permeated with remains of individuals ranging from the admired to the abhorred. Many celebrities of diverse fame can be visited there to this day, such as Jim Morrison's widow Pamela Morrison, Clarence Fender of Fender Guitars, Corrie ten Boom, the Dutch Christian who helped Jews escape the Holocaust, and Douglas Wrongway Corrigan, a noted pilot. Members of esteemed founding families including the Segerstroms, the Moultons, the Floors, and the Irvines have been laid to rest there as well. At the entrance to the Santa Ana Cemetery side, there stands a monument to the unknown soldiers who fell during the Civil War, a humble and reverential way to honor the dead, no matter the side they fought on. In 2004, former Santa Ana Mayor and amateur historian Gordon Bricken had a Confederate monument placed on the grounds with CSA, Confederate States of America, engraved at the top, and a quote on the lower base stating, "To honor the sacred memory of the pioneers who built Orange County, after their valiant efforts to defend the cause of Southern independence." The monument gained local notability when it was defaced and spray-painted with the word racist. For a large number of people, this was a late reminder of the intolerant and bigoted past that still somehow held strong ties in the city. Even though Santa Ana has a strong and diverse Hispanic community, the contentious piece wasn't removed until 2019, when it was discovered no permits had been approved or even filed on its behalf. The ex-mayor, who was buried close by, had taken it upon himself to honor his heroes. One of those men he admired was Henry W. Head, a former Confederate who went on to join Nathan Bedford Forrest's original Ku Klux Klan, earning the title of Grand Cyclops. Head moved to present-day Garden Grove, became a state assemblyman, helped in early efforts to have Orange County secede from Los Angeles County, then got a job as a physician in Santa Ana. It's said he continued his racist practices there, but the only evidence is a picture of Head in full Klan garb. The past coming to light was only the beginning of the shadow cast upon the sea of graves. In 2010, a 77-year-old man was found dead on the steps of the mausoleum. His wife had passed away in 2007, and the grief and loneliness brought him to end his own life by shooting himself. He was discovered by a visitor who came to view the intricate art of the building. This was reportedly not the first time someone had taken their life on the premises, and led to a new grief program that observed regular visitors for signs of emotional distress. This did not keep unwanted guests from arriving and wreaking havoc. From the seemingly harmless man in all black that would stalk people, running from tree to tree, to the drastically more dangerous gang activity, leading to 3 separate shootings. One night on Fairhaven Avenue in 2014, a young couple were shot at while walking together. A vehicle sped up to them and stopped, opening fire over 5 times. The couple found shelter by jumping the wall into the Lake Park senior community. They claimed the car had tried to run them down earlier in the day. In 2016, 2 men were shot while drinking beer at the Fairhaven Memorial following an altercation with other men inside of a gray SUV, leading to a melee and eventually the shooting of the pedestrians. Fortunately, both men survived. In 2020, a group of people honoring the anniversary of their loved one, gathered on the Santa Ana Cemetery side, were shot by 2 assailants with handguns. Initial reports to police were on the Fairhaven side, which is blocked off from cars, and this may have led to not only the escape of the shooters, but the demise of one of the gunshot victims, who was shot multiple times and pronounced dead on scene. Another victim, who survived, was found in a vehicle attempting to flee the gunfire. Regrettably, no information could be found as to whether the shooters involved in any of the 3 attacks have been identified or prosecuted. While investigating this story, we found 4 spent bullet casings, as if someone was trying to get rid of evidence, a sign the violence is yet to end. Some altercations were more disturbing than violent, like when Hugo Stanley Vargas broke into the Fairhaven Memorial around 4 a.m., damaged a flagpole, and desecrated a flag. A cemetery worker found him, and when the police arrived, he had removed an urn from the veterans section and spread the remains all over himself and the floor. He lay there in a fetal position, writhing in the ashes. When asked why he was there, he looked at the officer with vacant eyes while ash fell from his face and said, "I'm visiting my uncle." No relation of his could be found buried or entombed there. As deranged and unsettling as that was, nothing could scar the community like the tragic loss of innocent youths. On Halloween in 2014, while trick-or-treating in the evening, 3 young teen girls were struck by a car on Fairhaven Avenue. The girls were hit so hard by the SUV, they were thrown over 100 feet. 2 of the girls died instantly, while the third passed during transit to the hospital. The murderous driver fled the scene, and their gruesome-looking car was found abandoned less than a block away. Soon after, Joaquin Ramon Bell was found hiding with his family at a hotel in Stockton. Shockingly, Bell had his children in the vehicle at the time of the horrific accident, taking the lives of 3 young ones, and forever traumatizing those of his own children. He was convicted in the hit and run, and sadly only sentenced to 13 years. Woefully, the souls of the barely teenage girls will not be alone, as the area is said to be haunted by numerous spirits of varying temperament. There are a vast number of infants buried there, and many have heard them crying out for a comfort that will never come. Whimpers and sounds of rattles have been observed by countless visitors. People reported sightings of ghostly soldiers in Civil War attire overseeing the grounds with a stoic presence. A woman in a white burial gown has been spotted weeping while floating over the graves, only to disappear behind a tree or gravestone. The mausoleum has tales of disembodied, menacing laughs, floating orbs, voices where there are no living bodies to speak, strange chanting, and a spectral caretaker cruising the grounds at night, warning those foolish enough to trespass. Our Series 1 story, Invitation from the Dead, features a group of young men creeping through the memorial and mausoleum on Halloween night in search of the paranormal. That night they encountered a number of the apparitions just mentioned. Fairhaven Memorial and Santa Ana Cemetery, it seems, always be a place where the curious come to investigate and the dangerously mad are drawn. What brings the demented and maniacal to these places of eternal rest? Is there a sort of siren beckoning them? Could there be an energy released by these locations of death and grief, summoning a darkness to loom overhead, leaving us uneasy and afraid as a symptom of the corruption seeping through? Are we being taunted by the souls of the dead? Or is their endeavor to warn us of something we have yet to find the ability to comprehend? Are we missing or ignoring the signs and messages laid out for us by those on the other side? Will you remain ignorant to the metaphysical aspects of our world? Or will you be observant to the painful cries for help and the cryptic warnings of peril?
Subscribe to Black Letters for a new horror story every 13 days.